I think of that in terms of individual compatibility. But there's also the list of things that the midos that it takes to have a good and healthy marriage. And that's not necessarily automatic, that because I found someone I'm compatible with, I also now have this other list. We have to look at them separately. There's the general midos, and then there's also my list. When I used to give this talk, I used to only talk about sort of what are the general qualities that we need to have a healthy marriage, and how do I find those qualities in the person that or make sure that I'm seeing those qualities in the person that I'm dating, and how do I, because, and how do I recognize or notice red flags in dating? How do I recognize when there's maybe one of those midos is not just not there, but it's severely sort of compromised in the negative? How do I recognize it? How do I know it? How do I pick that up? What are the red flags? And I used to only talk about that because I thought to myself, well, how do you talk to a general group that might have some similarities in what their individual list is, but how do you talk to a general list about their individual compatibilities? What's compatible for one person isn't compatible for another person, and I kind of just stayed away from it. But what I saw more and more in my practice, I'm in private practice as a therapist, what I saw more and more in my practice is that, yes, there are people who are not happy because the person they're married to doesn't have the midos that it takes to have a healthy relationship. But there's also this percentage of people who are unhappy because they didn't know how to negotiate and really figure out for themselves and find in the person they were dating the right compatibility for them. And really these are two good people, but they're kind of making each other unhappy with the lack of compatibility. And so I decided I really needed to start talking more about that, because that, it's not just about not making each other miserable, but it's about really finding someone where you can build a home where you are happy and healthy and can raise a happy and healthy children, as Hashem one day. So let's first, in terms of deciding or talking about where we're heading, what does that mean? What is happy and healthy marriage? How do we define that? Where are we heading? What does that look like? What is a healthy marriage? How are we going to define that? Now, obviously, there's been numerous books and talks, lectures, etc., written about what is a healthy marriage. And so, but I'm going to try and make it really bekitzer and give you a sentence or two about what is a healthy marriage and what I'm hoping to give you some insights into in terms of dating and how to date and how to get to that place. And how I'm going to define a healthy marriage is one where each person thinks of it as their responsibility, their interest, their tafkid to care for the other person. Emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, physically. I think it's my job. I have my investment in caring for you, and vice versa. And so that both people are getting cared for from a caring position. I'm not in marriage and I'm getting cared for because I'm being selfish and thinking about myself constantly and worrying only about myself. I'm getting cared for, but from a giving position, because I'm giving and I'm caring and I'm looking and I'm concerned. And the other person is as well. Now, when we have that, we'll call that a healthy marriage. That doesn't mean that we never have a fight. That doesn't mean that we're never upset, because our spouse can't read our mind, and it can take some time for them to know what it would mean to me to feel cared for, to feel taken care of. So there could be some adjustment. There needs to be a lot of communication. There needs to be a lot of effort in that area. But when we have that idea, when we have that concept, when we have that belief and understanding about what is a healthy marriage, what it takes from us, that's what we would call a healthy marriage. It doesn't mean I never think about myself. It doesn't mean I never advocate for what I need. But the general feeling in the relationship is one where we think we're supposed to be here for the other. And that's where we're aiming towards, that kind of marriage. And that's what this talk on dating is going to try and help you figure out, how to use a dating experience when you're up to that, how to use a dating experience to find that person that you can have that with. because that's the relationship to aim for, where we're both looking to care for the other. So that's where we're heading. Now, when it comes to areas of individual compatibility, there are certain areas of individual compatibility that are very easy to talk about. People usually talk about them. They don't have so much of a problem talking about them because they're very, very concrete. And that was sort of another reason I didn't usually talk about individual compatibility when I would talk about dating to people, because everyone knows how to talk about these things. And we're going to go over them in a minute briefly, but they're really things that everyone knows how to talk about. For example, you'll see on the front of your handout, spiritual compatibility, right? Everyone knows, sort of, how to talk about what hashkafas they have and are looking for in another person, what things would be okay or not okay in their home, what activities might be okay, what kind of community they want to live in. These are the concrete individual things that we know how to talk about. The other area that people know how to talk about on the back of the next page is familial compatibility. Do we have similar families if that's important to us? Some people it's more important, some people it's less important. Some people could never, marry somebody who doesn't have a similar family background than them. Oh, I'm Sephardi, I could never marry an Ashkenazi, and some people it would be fine for. So we're not talking about it having to match up, we're talking about our orientation to it has to match up. Our comfortability with it has to match up. We're talking about whether we have similarities in our families and how they work, and if that's important to us, that we find that in that other person. Again, if that's important to us. Intellectual compatibility. I need somebody, what am I like? What kind of things do I like to do for fun? What kind of things do I think are, important? What kind of things do I find boring? These and maybe smarts. Intellectual compatibility sounds like it's all about smarts, but it's really about what kind of person I am and what kind of person I fit with. These areas are things that we know how to talk about. And so usually that was another reason that I didn't talk about it so much. But there's an area of compatibility that I think is at the core of many of the issues that I was seeing in my practice when it was a couple where they just were not compatible as opposed to somebody was really lacking midos. And that's the area of emotional compatibility. What we know from the research on marriages, from 30 to 40 years of research that's been done about marriages, is that there are certain types of behaviors, there are certain kinds of things that are present in marriages that will demonstrate to the researchers. They could meet the couple for, an hour and know based on how they interact with each other whether they're going to kind of make it and be happy or whether they're going to be miserable and maybe not make it. And there are certain things that they break down, which we're not going to go into right now, but there's certain types of behaviors, there's certain ways of interacting with each other that make or break a relationship, or really add or take away from the core of the relationship. And a lot of those can be taught. So even if a couple doesn't have them, or if a couple is, not great at them, they can be taught them. But there's one central element that is known to affect a marriage that cannot be taught because it's about who you are. And what that boils down to is your orientation to your emotional world and how you handle things in life and who you fit with in handling those things. What I would call emotional compatibility. And emotional compatibility is something that I almost rarely ever hear people talk about when they talk about their list. They don't talk about who they are emotionally and what they fit with emotionally, and therefore how to look for the person who they can emotionally be compatible with and have that core issue, which is so important, which the research has told us is so important in marriage. It makes marriage easier when we feel compatibly about feelings and we handle feelings in a compatible way, whatever that means to us. And that's an individual thing, which we're going to talk about, but whatever it means to us. So, I started deciding that, when I talk about dating, I don't want to just talk about the red flags. That's not enough. We need to talk also about individual compatibility, specifically emotional compatibility. So what is emotional compatibility? Emotional compatibility really means who I am as a person in my emotional world, and knowing who I am, knowing what I'm like, and knowing who I fit with, which is a separate conversation. Compatibility does not necessarily mean carbon copy. It might mean carbon copy. It might mean balance. And I can only know that about myself. And it's not that somebody who is more anxious always fits with somebody more calm. It's that person has to figure out, do I fit with somebody more anxious or do I fit with somebody more calm? When I'm faced with life stresses, do I like somebody who jumps in there with me? Or do I want somebody who sort of balances and anchors me? And so knowing the first part of emotional compatibility and being able to look for emotional compatibility is knowing who you are as an emotional being. Looking at how you handle things, looking to your sore spots or your struggles in handling stresses or problems or issues that come up, and knowing that about yourself. Am I a more laid-back person? Do I like to obsess about things? And do I like to be intense about things? Am I more happy-go-lucky? Am I more glass half empty or glass half full? You have a whole, I'm not going to read through, you all know how to read, Baruch Hashem. You have a whole list here of things to think about in terms of helping you quantify and identify, what am I like? What is my emotional type like? And that's really sort of the first thing to know, what am I like? Then you can start to think about who do I fit with? Who do I balance with? Now, one second. If you look at page 4. The questions to ask yourself, says yourself or your child, because I do this talk sometimes with girls and sometimes with girls and their mothers. The questions to ask yourself after you looked at the list of characteristics, and if you need help, you can ask a friend, you can ask a parent, you can ask a mentor, you can ask somebody who knows you well. If you're having a hard time, like, am I more happy-go-lucky, or am I more intense, or sometimes I'm intense, but there's a theme to you, usually. There's a usual way that you usually are oriented to the world. There's a way that you usually handle things on a regular basis. And that's sort of, what we're looking for. And if you're having a hard time understanding it, that's something that you can sort of talk to somebody, your closest friends, or a parent that knows you well, a sibling that knows you well. What would you say? You might be surprised at what they might say. Or you might know yourself pretty well and you won't really be surprised, or you won't really feel that you need help answering these questions. You'll kind of know for yourself what you are. So that's where you start. And then after you sort of know who you are, again, compatibility isn't about carbon copy. Compatibility is about who do I fit with? And a lot of times compatibility isn't talked about, or emotional compatibility isn't talked about. Another reason it's not talked about is that for a lot of people will say to themselves, well, if I don't have friends who are boys, how would I know? Like, we're talking about dating, we're talking about marriage. How would I know who I fit with if I don't have a lot of experience or interaction with boys? So one thing to understand is that we're not talking about gender here. We're talking about who I am and who I do life with best. And for that, you can look at friendships. Who are my closest friends? Everybody has a gazillion friends, or a lot of people have like wide friends, but then there's sort of the inner circle friends. Who are my closest friends, and what are they like? If my relationships feel healthy, and feel good, and feel nurturing, and feel comfortable, and feel like what I want to have in my life, You got to kind of be honest with yourself about that. If I have those kinds of friendships, what are those friends like? It doesn't always work. I was talking to one young woman who said, you know, I know what my very good friend is like, but I know that we're constantly in turmoil. So that would not be a good kind of test of who I want to look, what type of person I want to look for. That might be a good clue of who I might not want to look for unless I want to have a tumultuous marriage like I have a tumultuous best friendship. But in terms of, for most people, where their best friends are the ones that they're most comfortable with, where they have the best kind of relationship with, looking at that friendship and saying, well, what is that person like when I'm like this? When we need to negotiate something, when we need to tackle something, when something comes up for me, and I turn to my friend to talk about it, what is that friend like with me? Are they a carbon copy of me? And that's really what I like, and that's where I feel good, and that's who I do stresses with the best? Or are they a balance to me? Are they the intensity to my laid-backness? Are they the obsessing to my flightiness? What are they like? Or are they as intense or as obsessive along with me? And that's where you can sort of start to see the idea of compatibility and who I might fit with and who I might want to be with. Now, the question always arises, yeah, but friendships develop over years, over tremendously long periods of time. How do you evaluate in a dating situation, which is usually much shorter than how long I've had to develop this very good friendship with somebody, and therefore I know what I fit with? How do you evaluate that? How do you know about that in such a short period of time? So we're going to get to that. Put that aside for a second. Now we're going to shift for a moment, and we're going to talk about the other thing that we need to think about when we're dating, right? We have our list. Everyone has their list eventually. When they're ready to date, they have their list, their individual compatibility list. And then there's the list of characteristics of midos that it takes to have a healthy marriage, no matter what you are like as individuals. And if you look on page 4 on the bottom, that's that list. Every marriage, whatever kind of hashkafas, whatever kind of family, whatever kind of intellectual pursuits, whatever kind of emotional compatibility, every marriage, for it to be a healthy one, needs to include this list, where there's trust, and there's care, and there's honesty, and respect, and love, and support, and commitment. These are things that are universal midos, universal expectations in marriage, or universal necessities for marriage, for a healthy marriage. And when we think about this, it's interesting because no matter where you go, if I talk to an audience that is married, and I say, what are the things, without them having the cheat sheet here, and I say, what are the things that belong in marriage? Every audience, no matter what part of the community, no matter how secular or religious, no matter where they are, every audience will instinctively come up with this list. They don't need to have studied it. They don't need to have read about it. Every audience will come up with the same list. You kind of just feel it. People just know it, that these are the things that you have to have in a marriage for it to be a healthy one. But again, how do you evaluate such strong and deep things in a brief period of time? How do you know? What do you do? How do you see it? How do you know about it? How do you learn about it? So the idea is, for both of these things, is that you can't know about the person. So let me back up a minute. I like to use an analogy. When you're